For most of my life, my hands were never idle. They cooked meals from scratch, stitched torn clothes, held feverish foreheads in the night, and waved proudly from the sidelines at every small victory my children achieved. Those same hands cradled my late husband's face as he took his final breath, and those same hands buried him beneath the old oak tree he loved. When he was gone, I told myself I still had purpose, that my children's love would fill the emptiness his absence left behind. At first, it seemed they wanted to help me. They spoke in gentle voices, told me I had done enough, that I deserved to rest while they handled things. I believed them, because trust was a habit I had worn for decades, stitched into my bones. But behind their careful smiles lay something darker, something I pretended not to see. The papers appeared one afternoon, smooth and fit-for looking, spread across my kitchen table like a trap disguised as kindness. "It's just a formality, Mama," my eldest son said, sliding the pen toward me as though he were doing me a favor. My daughter added softly, "This will make things easier for everyone. You won't have to worry anymore." Their words dripped with reassurance, but underneath, I felt the sting of unease. I hesitated, my fingers trembling over the pen. My late husband's voice echoed faintly in my mind. "Always read what you sign." But how could I doubt my own children, the ones I carried, the ones I shielded from storms, the ones I fed when I had to go hungry? Their faces bore the innocence of yesterday, but their eyes glittered with something I had never noticed before: urgency, hunger, maybe even greed. The pen felt heavier than it should, as though it carried the weight of my entire life. My son leaned closer, his hand brushing mine, urging me forward. My daughter smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Please, Mama, don't you trust us?" she asked, her voice soft as a knife slipping between ribs. So I signed, one shaky signature across a line I barely understood, ink binding me two chains I could not yet see. The sound of the pen scratching the paper felt like a lock clicking shut. My children thanked me, kissed my cheek, and gathered the documents quickly, almost too quickly, as though they feared I might change my mind. When the door closed behind them, silence filled the house. I sat alone at the table, staring at the pen still warm from my grip. A chill crawled through me, colder than the winter drafts that crept under the door. Something was wrong. I couldn't name it yet, but I knew in my bones that my life was no longer my own. And as the light faded from the window, so did the certainty that my children loved me for who I was, not for what I had left to give. In the beginning, it almost felt like a blessing. My children checked in on me more often, bringing groceries, paying bills, reminding me to take my medicine. They called it lightening my load, and for a time I believed them. They spoke of how proud they were to care for me, how I had sacrificed for them, and now it was their turn to return the favor. I wanted so badly to believe it was love. But love doesn't lock away your checkbook. Love doesn't take the wedding band you wore for 50 years and sell it, claiming, "It's better this way, Mama." You don't need valuables lying around. Love doesn't whisper behind closed doors while you sit in your own kitchen like an intruder. The small things disappeared first: my control over what groceries were bought, what bills were paid. Then larger things followed: decisions about the house, my pension, even my doctor's appointments. I was asked nothing. I was told everything. My life became a calendar managed by others. My home, a place where I asked permission instead of offering welcome. I remember opening my jewelry box one morning, only to find it half empty. The brooch my husband gave me on our 20th anniversary, the pearl earrings I promised my granddaughter's son. My daughter brushed it off when I asked, "We're securing the assets, Mama. Don't worry about such little things." Little things, my memories, my history, my heart. The house felt less like a sanctuary, and more like a cage. Rooms I had once filled with laughter now echoed with silence. They moved through my home, as if it already belonged to them, rearranging furniture, discarding old photos they called clutter. I swallowed my words, but inside, grief and anger churned together. Still, I clung to hope. Perhaps they were only misguided. Perhaps their hearts had not grown so cold. That fragile hope shattered one evening, as I moved quietly down the hall, intending to fetch a blanket. Their voices drifted from the living room, sharp and careless, unaware that I was listening. "She doesn't even realize, does she?" My son chuckled. "Everything's ours now." My daughter's laugh followed, light and cruel. "Of course she doesn't. She thinks we're helping her. Imagine living in her own house and not even owning it anymore." The words struck me harder than any blow. My knees nearly buckled beneath me. the blanket slipping from my hands. I pressed against the wall, cold seeping into my bones. In that instant I understood, this wasn't care, it was conquest. And I, their mother, had become their prisoner. I often find myself remembering the nights I stayed awake sewing clothes by candlelight because we couldn't afford new ones. My fingers bled into the fabric, yet I smiled when my children twirled in those garments as if they had been spun from gold. I remember skipping meals so their plates were full, working double shifts while my husband's health failed, telling myself that love was measured in what you gave up, not what you kept. And now, those same children, once clinging to my skirts and calling me their safe place, have bound me in chains I never expected. They didn't need rope or locks. A few signatures and their practiced smiles were enough. The first true betrayal came when I tried to withdraw a small sum from my savings account, the one I had built patiently over decades. The banker glanced at me with pity, shaking his head. "I'm sorry, Mom. Access to this account is now restricted." Restricted. That word echoed through me like a verdict. My money earned with every blister, every sleepless night, was no longer mine. I turned to my son for help, explaining that I needed cash for groceries. He sighed, almost annoyed, before handing me a few bills, as though I were a child begging for pocket money. "Mama, you don't need to worry about finances anymore. We'll handle it. Handle it." The arrogance in his voice carved into me deeper than any knife. Worse still was the day of my granddaughter's birthday. I had set aside a modest sum to buy her a simple gift. Something she could remember me by, a silver locket with a tiny space for a photo. I approached my son quietly, asking for enough to make the purchase. His face hardened. "You don't need to spend on things like that. We'll buy her something better." I tried to reason, to explain that it wasn't about the money but about a grandmother's love. His answer was final. "No, Mama, you don't decide these things anymore." The humiliation swallowed me whole. To stand before my own child, begging for the right to give, was a degradation I had never imagined. In that moment, I was no longer a mother, no longer a provider, not even a person with dignity. I was a dependent, stripped of autonomy, a prisoner within walls I had built with sacrifice. That night, I sat alone with the unused wrapping paper and ribbon in my lap, tears soaking through until the colors blurred. My granddaughter would never know the gift I wanted to give her, never know the love stitched into it, and my son, my own flesh and blood, had denied me that simple joy. Yet, as the tears dried, something inside me hardened. They believed I was weak, that my silence meant surrender. They mistook age for helplessness, grief for blindness. They thought they had won. But deep inside, a fire began to burn, small, steady, and unyielding. If they had underestimated me, they would regret it. The reflection. Memories of love. Shadows of greed. There are nights when the silence feels heavier than the walls around me. When I close my eyes and drift backward into a world that no longer exists, I see my children gathered around the dinner table, faces glowing in the soft light of a single bulb. We didn't have much, but laughter was always plentiful. My husband would tell stories that made the children squeal with delight, and I would watch them with pride, swelling in my chest, knowing that love was richer than gold. Birthdays were simple but joyful. A cake baked from scratch, candles that dripped wax onto the frosting, handmade gifts wrapped in newspaper because that was all we could afford. Yet my children's eyes sparkled brighter than any diamonds. Back then, I believed they understood the values. We lived by gratitude, humility, family, above all else. But now, those values seem like ashes scattered in the wind. The same children who once clung to my skirts, who promised never to leave my side, now measure worth only in bank accounts and deeds. Their laughter has turned sharp, their smiles calculated, their hearts seemingly hollow. When I feel myself breaking, I turn to the memory of my husband. He was a man of integrity, quiet but strong. I remember his hand wrapped around mine during hard times, his voice steady when mine trembled. "Our wealth," he would always say, "isn't in what we own, but in what we give." I hold those words close, a lifeline in a storm that threatens to drown me. One evening, desperate for comfort, I opened his old desk. The scent of aged wood and ink greeted me, stirring 1,000 memories. I ran my hand across the surface, tracing the grooves left by his writing, and pulled open a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside lay letters, documents, and small notes he had carefully kept. Among them, I discovered something that made my heart stop. Papers, official and stamped, tucked away like a hidden gift from the past. As I unfolded them, my eyes widened. A thought, fragile but powerful, began to form. Perhaps I was not as powerless as they believed. Perhaps my husband had left me more than memories. Perhaps he had left me a weapon. The papers from my husband's desk weighed heavily in my trembling hands. But heavier still was the decision they forced upon me. I could no longer sit quietly while my children stripped me of dignity piece by piece. The next morning, before they arrived to check in on me, I slipped out of the house, shawl pulled tightly around my shoulders, and made my way to an office I hadn't entered in years, the office of our old family lawyer, Mr. Whitaker. He looked older, grayer, but his eyes still carried the same sharpness I remembered. When I placed the documents before him, his brows lifted. He read in silence, nodding occasionally, then leaned back with a sigh. "They thought they cornered you," he said, voice low but firm, "but they were careless. Power of attorney gives them reach, yes, but it doesn't erase your rights unless a court deems you incompetent. And no such ruling exists." His words cracked open the darkness inside me, letting light seep through. I wasn't helpless. Not yet. I still had one move left on the board. Mr. Whitaker explained carefully. I could exercise my authority to freeze all accounts tied to my assets, halting every transaction, every reckless sale, every greedy indulgence. My children, so certain they had won, would wake to find their control shattered. As he spoke, my heart pounded not from fear, but from something fiercer, determination. For too long, I had been their victim, watching silently as they dismantled the life I had built. Now, I had a chance to remind them whose blood ran in their veins, whose strength had carried them through childhood. The plan was delicate, dangerous even. If they discovered my intentions too soon, they might tighten their grip further, pushing me into true isolation. But secrecy was a skill I had honed across years of protecting my family, hiding worry behind smiles, shielding pain with laughter. I could do it again. Only this time for myself. When I left Mr. Whitaker's office, the autumn wind bit at my cheeks, but I felt warmth rise within me. My hands no longer shook as they had when I signed away my freedom. Instead, they curled into steady fists at my sides. For the first time in months, I lifted my chin, squared my shoulders, and walked with purpose. My children had underestimated me, blinded by their own greed, but they were about to learn that even a woman stripped of nearly everything could still wield the sharpest blade, her will. And as I stepped onto the street, I allowed a small, quiet smile to spread across my face. They wouldn't see it coming. Shall I carry this momentum into Section 6? The secret retaliation, setting the trap. The secret retaliation, setting the trap. The days that followed demanded an act worthy of the stage. Around my children, I played the part of the frail old mother who nodded obediently and asked no questions. I let them believe they had broken me, that their power was complete. But beneath that mask, I was alive with purpose. Every smile I gave them was a veil, every silence a weapon. Each morning, after they left, I walked to Mr. Whitaker's office, careful to take winding routes so no one would suspect. Together we combed through the labyrinth of accounts my children had eagerly tied to my name. Their arrogance had left trails, bank statements showing sudden transfers, suspicious purchases, even loans taken against my property. They had treated my life savings as if it were a limitless fountain, and in their haste, they left the cracks wide open for me to see. I sat across from Mr. Whitaker for hours, my eyes following every line of ink on each document. He showed me how the law could still shield me, how loopholes became ladders if one was brave enough to climb. Piece by piece, we built a case that would sever their control, at least temporarily, and place their greed in a but secrecy was crucial. At home, I acted the doting mother. When my daughter prattled on about redecorating my living room using money I knew she siphoned from my accounts, I smiled faintly, as though I barely understood. When my son chastised me for spending too much on groceries, I bowed my head meekly. They thought me docile. They thought me tamed. And every time I let them believe it, my resolve grew sharper. The nights were the hardest. Alone in my room, I lay awake with papers hidden beneath the floorboard, my heart racing with equal parts fear and anticipation. If they discovered me, the retaliation would be swift. They had already stripped me of dignity. What would they take if they knew I was fighting back? Yet fear could not outweigh justice. Each secret meeting with Mr. Whitaker added another stone to the foundation of my plan. Finally, the day came when the stack of filings was complete. My hand shook slightly as I signed each one, not from doubt, but from the thrill of reclaiming what was stolen. With those documents, we moved to freeze every account tied to my name. locking their greedy hands out of the coffers they believed were theirs by right. As the last paper was sealed, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The sound echoed like freedom in the quiet office. My years of silence had ended. My voice had returned, written in ink and stamped with the law's authority. That evening, as I sat alone at my kitchen table, the same place where they had tricked me into signing away my freedom, I whispered into the empty air, my words steady and cold. Let's see how they like living without control. It began quietly, like a storm building far off at sea. My children woke to small inconveniences: cards declined at the grocery store, a check bouncing embarrassingly at the car dealership. At first, they brushed it off, confident it was some banking error. But as the hours passed, the ripples grew into waves. By midday, their phones were buzzing with angry calls. My son's business partner demanded to know why payroll hadn't cleared. My daughter's credit card company froze her account after repeated failed charges. Their voices, once dripping with smug certainty, now cracked with panic. Try the joint account. I heard my daughter hiss over the phone. I did, my son snapped, his voice rising. It's frozen. Everything's frozen. The life they had built on my back began crumbling, brick by greedy brick. Without my assets, their glossy facade collapsed. No more impulsive purchases. No more investments made with my savings. No more power dressed up as responsibility. I imagined them pacing their rooms, shouting into phones, blaming everyone but themselves. The same children who had once smirked about owning everything now were being stripped bare by the law they had twisted to their advantage. By evening, their arrogance gave way to fury. Rage replaced panic as realization dawned. They knew this wasn't some mistake. This was deliberate. This was me. I sat in my kitchen, sipping tea, hands steady for the first time in months. Outside, the world moved as usual, unaware of the war raging inside my family. For too long, they had assumed my silence meant defeat. They had forgotten that silence could also mean strategy. The slam of a car door broke the calm. Moments later, my front door rattled under their fists. Their voices carried through the wood, thick with anger and disbelief. "Open this door, Mama," my son shouted. "We need to talk now," my daughter added, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. Their footsteps thundered against the porch, the sound of entitled children who had finally been denied. I set down my cup, rose slowly, and walked toward the door. For months, I had been the prisoner in this house, but tonight, for the first time, they were the ones outside, demanding entry, desperate for answers. And I was ready to give them the truth. The door burst open before I could reach it. My son stormed in first, face red with fury, followed closely by my daughter, whose eyes were sharp with accusation. They didn't even wait for me to speak. "What did you do?" he barked, fists clenched. "You've ruined everything," she hissed, slamming her purse on the table. For a moment, I let them rage. I watched the children I had raised, children who once cried for me in the night, who once clung to my hand at school gates, now looking at me as if I were their enemy. The silence I held unsettled them more than their own words. Finally, I spoke, my voice steady, firm, and strangely calm. "What did I do?" I repeated softly. "I remembered who I am. I remembered whose name was on those accounts before you ever touched them. I may have given you power of attorney, but I never gave you the right to strip me of dignity." They froze, caught off guard by my tone. My daughter tried to recover, crossing her arms like a shield. "You don't understand how the world works anymore, Mama. We were protecting you." I shook my head. "Protecting me? By stealing from me, by making me beg for grocery money, by denying me the right to buy my granddaughter a gift. That wasn't protection. That was greed. That was betrayal." My son's jaw tightened. "You can't just undo everything. The courts will see." I cut him off. My voice rose, echoing in the room like thunder. "You thought I was helpless. You forgot the law still recognizes me as competent. Until a court rules otherwise, my decisions stand. And I have decided you no longer control me or my money." The words hung heavy in the air. For once, it was they who fell silent. I stepped closer, my eyes fixed on theirs. "I taught you about honesty, about respect, about family. Your father and I sacrificed everything to raise you, and this is how you repay me, by chaining me with my own signature. You have forgotten your roots, but I have not." For a heartbeat, I saw something flicker in their eyes, shame perhaps, or the faint memory of love, but just as quickly, it hardened into something else. Calculation. They said nothing more. My daughter snatched up her purse. My son muttered under his breath, and together they stormed out the way they came, leaving the door swinging in their wake. I stood there, chest rising and falling, the silence of the house returning like a bomb. It was not victory, not yet, but it was the first breath of freedom I had taken in months. Through the window, I watched their car peel away. I knew that look in their eyes. This wasn't over. They would try again, this time with lawyers and courts. But for now, I allowed myself a small smile. They had underestimated me once. They would not make that mistake again. The day of the hearing dawned gray and heavy, as though the skies themselves carried the weight of what was to come. I sat quietly in the courtroom, my lawyer by my side, hands folded neatly in my lap. My children filed in with their attorneys, eyes sharp, expressions hard. They wouldn't even look at me. The bailiff called the room to order, and the case was laid out. A mother versus her own children, my name against theirs. A family feud, dragged into the cold light of justice. Their lawyer struck first, his tone dripping with false concern. My clients acted only in their mother's best interest, he said smoothly. She's an elderly woman, confused, easily overwhelmed. They took responsibility to protect her finances, to ensure her well-being. What kind of children would they be if they didn't? I bit back a bitter laugh. Protect me. They had bled me. My attorney, Rose.com, but commanding. What kind of children? Indeed, the kind who sell their mother's heirlooms without her knowledge, the kind who deny her access to her own savings, the kind who reduce the woman who raised them into a beggar under her own roof. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. One by one, the evidence was laid out. Bank statements showing transfers into their personal accounts, testimonies from neighbors who saw me stranded without money, even the list of valuables they sold. Each page was a dagger, and I watched my children squirm under the weight of truth. Then came the moment I had dreaded, my testimony. The judge's eyes met mine. Double quotes, Mrs. Khan, he said gently. Please tell us, in your own words, why you are here. I rose slowly, steadying myself on the wooden rail. For a second, I wasn't sure my voice would come. Then it did, stronger than I imagined. I am here, I said, because I spent my life building a family. I worked. I sacrificed. I held those children when they were sick. I fed them when there wasn't enough food for me. And now, those same children turned my love into chains. They stripped me of choice, of dignity, of freedom. Not because I was incapable, but because they were greedy. A silence fell so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. My daughter looked down. My son shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in their eyes. The lawyers sparred, voices rising. But the tide had turned. Even the judge's expression had softened, not with pity, but with recognition of injustice. When the ruling finally came, my breath caught. The court finds, the judge declared, that the power of attorney was exploited for personal gain. Effective immediately, all assets shall be restored under the petitioner's sole authority. Furthermore, the respondent's rights to act on her behalf are revoked. The gavel struck like thunder. My children erupted, their lawyer trying to quiet them. My son accused me of betrayal. My daughter called me but I didn't flinch. I stood taller than I had in years. I had not only regained my freedom, I had reclaimed my dignity. As the bailiff restored order, the judge gave one last look. This court stands to protect the vulnerable. And today, Mrs. Khan, justice is yours. I sat down slowly, trembling but unbroken. I had won the battle. But as I glanced at my children, their faces twisted with rage and humiliation, a question gnawed at me. Had I lost them forever? The house felt different that morning, lighter, as though the walls themselves had exhaled after holding their breath for too long. For the first time in months, I woke without the heavy dread that had become my shadow. My keys rested on the nightstand, my checkbook sat neatly in the drawer, and the silence was not suffocating but peaceful. Everything was mine again. I walked through each room slowly, touching the furniture, the photographs, the familiar trinkets that had once felt stolen from me in spirit, if not in fact. My children had tried to strip me of more than money. They had tried to erase the woman I was, to reduce me to a dependent, a ghost in my own home. But I was no ghost. I was flesh, blood, and spirit. And I was still here. There was victory in the court's ruling, yes, but the deeper victory was reclaiming myself, to stand tall in front of my children, to look them in the eye, and to remind them that a mother is not a bank account, nor a possession to be controlled. That was justice. Yet as I brewed my tea, the steam curling into the air, I felt the pang of another truth. I had won back my freedom, but at a cost I never wanted to pay. I thought of my late husband often. He would have been heartbroken to see what had become of our family, but he would also have been proud of me. I remembered his words in our leaner days. Strength doesn't mean you never bend. It means you never break. Those words had carried me through grief, through struggle, and now through betrayal. My phone buzzed once on the counter. A message from my daughter, a single sentence laced with anger and resentment. I read it, then set the phone aside. I didn't reply. For the first time, I chose silence, not the silence of submission, but the silence of peace. Later, I walked into the garden and sat on the old wooden bench. The roses had started to bloom again, stubbornly pushing their way through soil and thorn. They reminded me of myself, weathered, scarred, but still capable of beauty. I closed my eyes and let the sun warm my face. The neighbors would whisper, no doubt, about the scandal of a mother suing her children. Some would judge me, others would pity me. But I knew my truth. I had given my life to raising those children, and when they betrayed me, I gave myself one final gift: freedom. No longer would I wait for permission to spend my own money. No longer would I beg for kindness from those who saw my love as weakness. My future might be quieter, emptier of familiar voices, but it would be mine. And in that truth, there was dignity. I stood, brushing the dirt from my hands, and felt a calm strength rise within me. My story was not one of loss, but of survival. They thought they had buried me under papers, signatures, and deceit. Yet I had risen. With a steady breath, I whispered into the garden air, letting the words settle into the earth itself. They thought I was powerless, but in the end, it was their greed that destroyed them.